Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our free Thursday webinar. I'm Nikki Jovicic from Lookupstrata and I'm your host for today. Now we know that strata life comes with unique challenges and being prepared for the unexpected is crucial. This webinar is designed to equip you, whether you're a lot owner, committee member or strata manager, with the knowledge and skills to navigate emergencies with confidence. We're joined by Leanne Habib from Premium Strata and Shady Eskander, former Opal Towers Chairperson, to shed some light on emergency readiness for strata communities. Leanne and Shady will break down the essential roles of strata managers and committees during emergencies, and you'll also gain practical tips and strategies to enhance your community's response to major defects and emergencies. Shady will offer real-life insights on crisis management, improving safety and building resilience within your community, and Leanne's here to provide expert guidance to strengthen your community's response plan. This is a New South Wales session today, and the content may not be applicable outside of New South Wales. But before we begin, I'd like to mention that the information in this session, including the discussions arising from submitted questions and chat conversations, is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as advice, and you should seek independent advice before acting on the information contained in the session. We welcome back Leanne Habib from Premium Strata. Leanne, co-founder of Premium Strata, is a licensed strata and community management manager and a real estate managing agent with more years in the property industry than she cares to admit. Having previously worked in various senior management roles with large strata and community agencies, Leanne cultivated a niche in the eastern suburbs and North Shore. Throughout her career, Leanne's top priority has been ensuring her clients' needs are met and their goals are achieved, and this dedication to client success continues to be the driving force behind her innovative management strategies. A member of Strata Community Australia and a dynamic forward thinker, Leanne is also a regular presenter and contributor to Lookupstrata. And we also welcome Shady Eskander. One of Shady's most notable achievements is his role as chairperson of the Owners Corporation at Opal Tower. Throughout his role, he led the owners through the infamous defects that plagued the building, demonstrating exceptional leadership and problem-solving skills. And Shady's ability to navigate and manage this complex situation helped ensure that owners emerged with confidence throughout each stage. Shady is a serial entrepreneur and founder of Spotto, a patented hardware and software solution solving the world's parking problems. So welcome, Leanne and Shady. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you all.
Looking forward to talking about this topic. So there's four main areas that I wanted to cover off today and I think are crucial in the event of an emergency. And it's really the communications during emergency, notifications, the rectification side of it, and also documenting things, during that crisis. So they're the main four areas that we will be covering off today. Where do we start? I think communications is the essential and the starting point. And I think it's very important to consider when you're in an emergency situation, who actually reported the crisis. What is the nature of the crisis? Is it fire? Is it a flood? Is it a structural issue? In Shady and Opal Towers case, it was a structural issue. And establishing immediate site contact to an authorised representative can be on site. I think that's very, very important. I normally would refer to the site contact as the one that's actually reported the crisis because they're aware of it, they can be on site, they can assist until you can have a representative attend. And an authorised representative might be a member of the committee, the managing agent, a building manager, but I think it's important to have someone there until an authorised rep can get to site. And I think, Shady, you would have had similar experience with the incident at Opal Tower where immediately you established a site contact.
Absolutely. We actually put in place a project manager that was able to be our eyes and ears. And it's very important when you're a committee member to realise that you don't have an engineering background, you don't have a fire background, a structural background. So it's important to have representation so you don't miss something or the developer builder can kind of pull it over you when you're working through the defect process. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Moving on to communications as well. So who do we issue communications to during a crisis? I think it's important to notify all residents, managing agents and owners. It's important to keep them all informed. And it's essential to have multiple methods of communication. So by email, phone, especially those who are directly impacted because they might not be on the email. So it's important that if they're directly impacted, you're bringing it to their attention immediately. Phone is obviously the method that has that immediate effect. display notifications on the site, SMS texts where possible, and ensure that, Strata Committee are receiving separate updates as they are, members of the committee. If you are a managing agent or a building manager, it's essential that you're keeping the committee well informed. And again, having on-site presence for further communications, I'm going to touch on that later on in the presentation, I think is key, especially when residents are getting emotional. Having someone on site will assist, because there are some people that won't have access to email, don't receive the notification for some reason. So having someone there for these residents who are obviously distressed because of the situation to go to does assist in a crisis from experience. We could definitely say having someone on site is the preferred way. It's also essential to consider what do you actually include in the communications. And I've broken it down with the initial communications and then ongoing. So if we just focus on the initial communications, I think the nature of the issue in high level is key. Details of any impact, like, is there a section of the building that you can't utilize, one level of the building? Is the power out? Is it a safety issue that, part of the building everyone needs to evacuate? So I think it's very important that when you are notifying residents, you're detailing any areas that they should be cautioned and not use. Details of the action, like what and who, what's happening, who are you engaging to take control of this crisis or emergency, and time frame where possible. Sometimes it's not possible at the early stages, but if you can provide a time frame, that's really important, because everyone by then would know about the emergency situation, but then really want to understand, well, what's the timing, ETA, what's going to happen, when is that going to happen? And seek information regarding any disabilities among the residents. I think that's really important. I'm going to touch on that later on, but, ask, does anyone have a disability? If so, to contact you so that you can actually give them priority, give them the assistance that they may need, because if there's an emergency and they're not mobile, they might not be able to evacuate quickly. So I think that's very, very important as well. And it's something that I've been pushing to say that we should be collecting that information during our annual fire safety statements annually, where it's noted on the AFS of any residents that may have a disability or need assistance during emergencies, so that if, emergency service workers or others are on site, they can be made aware of those residents who might be vulnerable and needing additional assistance during emergency as well. So it's something to keep in mind. Ongoing communications, it's all about just providing, progress updates with more detail, regular report on any further issues that have been discovered, and just report on further action that's being implemented as well. So I think at this point in time, the most important thing now is timeframes. So initial communications is high level. This is the emergency situation. This is what we're doing. But I think now residents by now really want to know when, what's happening, what are the timeframes. And I think, Shady, you could probably relate to that too, where you had a lot of residents that were getting quite anxious during your situation at Opal, and they just wanted to know when can we get back in? When can I get my stuff?
Yeah, so I would say, Leanne, to your point, communication is the most important aspect of any issue. And communication is ultimately collaboration. You're communicating with the developer, you're communicating with the builder, you're communicating with the owners. You've got people who are renters. They think very differently to people who are owner-occupiers. You've got people with disabilities, you've got people with animals. So everyone has a different frame of reference. And so communication is so important to open up that line, so that once you build that trust and people understand you are talking to me, you are thinking about my personal situation or my group of people's situation, you start to allow people to allow you that time to investigate, to provide more information, do due diligence. While if you're staying quiet early on, trying to build up your paper trail, you will really build up some big mistrust. And then when the issue requires some voting or become public in nature, a lot of politics can hold you back because you didn't begin by collaborating, you didn't begin by communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good point, Shady. And to add to that, I think when you're silent, people then start speculating, and the speculations is what can get you into trouble. So I'm a big believer, the facts are the facts, communicate the facts. Timing is essential, as I said. The content of the communication is essential, as you have also said. So it's important to issue, timely notifications and updates, provide the information they need to be reassured, to have the confidence in the committee or the building manager or managing agent that's in control of the crisis on their behalf.
It's human nature to be, pessimistic and question someone's motive. It takes time to build up that trust, especially for us. As you know, Leanne, the defect happened 6 months into the inception of the building. So nobody knew us. No one knew who we were. And you definitely need to help build that trust by beginning, as you say, with communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your crisis in particular, Shady, had warranty, and we're going to touch on that shortly. So obviously, if there's a builder's warranty, that's when the finger pointing comes in, but we'll touch on that shortly. But yeah, very good points, something to be mindful of. So committee communications, I think, should always be separate. And this is obviously to the building managers and strata managers, and even committee members yourself. If you're communicating, I think it's essential as members, you keep each other well informed, because, as resident communications, provide more detail to the committee. And in particular, if you are briefing experts or, those who have provided you information about the crisis, all of that should be shared with your committee members. And if you're one member receiving it, share it with your other fellow committee members. I think that's really important. I mean, I've got a management style of where everything I do, I blind copy in my strata committee members, and something we do. And I think that's important because for committee members who are required to make the decisions on behalf of the owners, some decisions are for owners, but some are also for your committee. It's important that they're well informed, and being well informed is being a privy and being exposed to communications during this crisis, especially when they're required to make quick decisions. You want them to be well informed. So a tip for me is have separate communications to the committee and amongst the committee. Ensure it's at a more detailed level. And I think, Shady, you can even comment on that, because I know that your committee had a particular chat group as well, so that as a committee you could make quick decisions, be aligned, and give one direction to your managing agent, your expert, your lawyers, whoever was assisting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things as well that you kind of also forget is that you're actually managing not only a myriad of personalities and people with different backgrounds, but also different cultures. And sometimes you have language barriers. And so we actually very quickly had to have representations of different cultural groups in our building, whether they were Korean speaking, Chinese speaking, because we had a lot of overseas investors. We had a lot of people who didn't have English as their first language. And so we actually developed a few chat groups on WhatsApp and also WeChat, so that those who were able to jump on those different communication platforms based on what they're used to using. For example, the Asian demographic is very accustomed to WeChat. We then had a representative of the committee who thankfully did speak Chinese. She was able to moderate that chat. And so whatever was going off in the English chat was able to be further communicated on the Chinese chat. And it honestly was, I would say, one of the biggest points that allowed us to be able to move a vast number of people who owned apartments in our building towards understanding what they're voting on when it came to some very big ticket decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can support that, being part of it as well. That was essential, and that was very, very key. And that particular committee member was very instrumental in managing those communications. And as we say, it's emotions. I mean, it's people's homes, it's people's asset. It's all of a sudden there's a disaster. What are we doing? Everyone becomes very emotional, and naturally you would expect that. I mean, I think if we're all in that situation, would be the same. So I think it's very, very important. Again, touching on communications is the key to massaging any of that emotion and keeping that under control as best as you can in the circumstances.
Absolutely, Leanne. Yeah, think about who's in our building, what's their background, what's the best way that they like to be spoken to or communicated with, and start to build a plan so that when crisis does emerge, touch wood it doesn't, but when it does emerge, you already understand your plan of action with communication.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So with the instructions as well, so to the committee, I think it's very, very important. So if you're a managing agent or you're a strata managing agent or you're a committee member, it's very important to understand your delegated powers and functions. And if you don't have the power to make a decision, then seek the instructions where it's required, because that's really, really important. And what to do in the absence of instructions. So, I would be mitigating my loss and risk as a strata manager. So if I wasn't getting instructions, I'd then have to apply the common sense and say, okay, I don't have instructions, but I need to do A to mitigate further risk and damage for these lot owners. So not getting instructions is what I'm saying isn't a reason not to act, but at the same time, you want to ensure that you've attempted and crossed all avenues to seek the instructions that you need. But it's very, very important, whatever you're doing, whether you're a committee member, a strata managing agent, or a building manager, that you're keeping the principle. And the principle is the owner's corporation, well informed. If you're part of a community, it's keeping the community association well informed, and act where possible on instructions to mitigate the liability. But the ultimate goal for me is mitigating loss. And sometimes you may have to act without that instructions because of timing. and an emergency, but as long as you can substantiate that instruction or action, it's not because, I just didn't want to wait for the instructions, or, I just didn't want to seek the instructions. It's more that if I waited, there could have been, more consequences. And as a result, I acted upon my instinct, or I acted upon the expert that was advising me at the time on site, and I made that quick decision. Because I think you'd get more criticism if you left something and it created a further bigger loss, as opposed to taking the action and charge to mitigate the loss. And I think, Shady, you were very instrumental in doing that, you and your committee, where you had to make the decisions because of timing. And then later on, we went to a meeting and ratified those decisions just to keep the record and the paper trail going.
When you're dealing with developers and you're dealing with builders, I can tell you they will not come to the table unless there is a legal letter sent to their legal counsel or to their legal representatives. That is just the nature of the beast. So while you might be weary of lawyers, and we had that, so culturally as well, we had people who just didn't like the idea of using lawyers. If you choose a lawyer who is specialized in strata, has experience in defects, I can assure you that that is money well worth spent. And you also have to remember another important point. You are representing the owner's corporation. The owner's corporation can't speak for itself. So the committee is its voice, and the committee is the one that's able to place around the owner's corporate, around that common area building, that lot, the right team in place to ensure it's protected. How expensive is that asset to build? Our building was over $300 million in value. You see your insurance premiums every year. So spending some money to protect that asset that is worth that much requires you to have some legal endpoint, because you don't know how big that defect is, whether that small crack or that small water leak is a systemic issue or a localized issue. And so having legal advice early on, as Leanne is saying, will mitigate your loss depending on how big that loss is. Now, it might be a small loss, it might not grow into a really big loss, but you don't want to roll that dice. Get advice early, have them on board, and then see if you need them for the long road or just for the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. It's taking control early before it manifests into something bigger. So who do we notify and why? So I think it's important to notify insurers where required. And in most cases, it would be required, because if there are public liability claims and, other claims that are an insurable event, it's important to let them know from the outset, because a lot of the insurers generally like to have their assessor attend during the emergency. And I think it's important that they are given that opportunity so they can come to site and assess the emergency, the crisis. So if it is claimable, you haven't breached any requirements of disclosure at that time, and giving the insurer opportunity to appoint their own assessors and experts if you're going to be claiming those costs. But it's also important to notify, required experts and contractors and third parties. Third parties, what I mean by that is, we had a situation which was a fire in St. Leonard's at Christmas Eve that just went by. And there was a fault from the main electricity box from the street into the building, which sparked the fire. It's only probably about a couple of years old building. So we had to notify Ausgrid, and they came out to site. We then, obviously, because it was a new building under warranty, we also had to notify the builder. So where there is warranty, you need to notify the builder, and that's very much Shady's situation at Opal Tower. So it's important to have the builder on site, any third parties such as Ausgrid on site, your required experts. You definitely want experts on your behalf, because if you're dealing with the builder under warranty or dealing with a third party that could be liable, you don't want to be saying something that can compromise your claim or your position. And I think it's important to have an expert on your behalf there representing the owners to ensure that we're all on the same level, and we're ensuring that your rights under warranty are not compromised by anything that you may say. And you might say innocently, not knowing, but I think it's important to have experts on site. So why do we, notify these key people? It's to ensure that we've got the evidence, and the timing of the evidence is crucial. So, for example, if I bring in the insurer's assessor after repairs are done, well, they might then question, well, was it a defect? Is it something that was claimable? You fixed it now. How can I come in and, opine on that and confirm and accept liability? So the tip here is timing is very important of these notifications. I would not be bringing in these parties at the end or after you've rectified. You need to bring them in right at the beginning. But you need key parties on site as well to get control of the crisis. So these are parties that could assist in controlling the crisis. for example, the experts to give you a way forward. How do we get out of it? Okay, we've got a flood. What are we doing? We have a fire. What are we doing? We've got a structural issue. What are we doing? And Shady, you might want to sort of touch on this more, that when that major incident happened in Opal, how did you take control? What experts did you bring to site immediately? I know you touched on a project manager, but what else? What other steps did you and your committee take?
So I normally say to this point, go to the top. So go to the top of the building company, go to the top of the developing company, go to the top of every company that had a say or had a hand in your building. When you go to the top, that's where the decision makers are. And that's where you can get some attention and make sure that they themselves know that you mean business when it comes to resolving your defect and potentially allowing them to do that in the most cost-effective way. So we did that. We went to the top of every company involved. We had some really good relationships that we started to build with the builders, with the developers, to say, listen, we're not here to make this problem bigger than it needs to be. Let's all work together. The common goal is to fix the defect. That's best for us. That's best for you, for your company moving forward. And if we do that, then that's the ultimate goal here. So trying to just make people understand, yes, we might have to, argue in court because that's just the nature of the dance. So we were in court, as everybody knows, and we had, a big case, but we did that in a way that ultimately, represented the goal that was to fix the issue in the most timely manner possible and resolve what we can resolve, and then argue about what we need to argue about if we have a different view about a point in the defect.
Yeah, definitely. And it was picking the battles. It was pressing the important things and not worrying about the smaller petty things, because I think overall you're all about getting the result, and it's focusing on the bigger things to get that result. And that's obviously all in the relation of a defect. But if it was an emergency non-related to warranty, then it's about getting the right, experts on site to assist as well. So some key points when, issuing these notifications, I think it's keep the details factual. Don't go into the he said and she said. For me, it's about sticking to the facts, include the key details, and that is obviously details around the impact, summarize the action that you're taking today, and be clear on the call to action. Be clear on what you want. What do you want to achieve? And I think ensuring that, notifications are, prepared and documented is very important. You will be making a lot of phone calls during this crisis or emergency, which is essential, but keep a record of those phone calls, because unfortunately phone calls aren't a record unless you've recorded them. It's very, very important. And again, the ultimate goal in all of this is limit the liability and protect the owner's corporation's position. That's what it's all about. Taking control, mitigate the risk and liability, and having control of the situation on behalf of the owner's corporation. That is the ultimate goal for everyone that is working in this crisis. So rectification now. Now we need to get on with getting things fixed and rectified. So I think it's important to determine, what experts are required, if any. Some emergencies won't need experts and might just need contractors, for example. So it's very important to determine whether you need an expert as well as a contractor. And I always define it as the expert is the specialist and the contractor is the GP. So, the GP can give you the medications and send you off to get better. The contractor can come in, do the repair and get you out of trouble. But the expert is that next level when it's a bit more complicated and you require more of that high senior experience and someone independent to specify how it should be rectified. That's when you lean and look at an expert. But also what support personnel are required. And I think that's important about having someone on site to deal with all the emotions, having staff on site. So if you're a strike managing agent, have a, I know when we have an emergency situation, the fire one that I mentioned in St. Leonard's, we had a team down there that had their laptops out. We had someone, dealing with the communications. We had someone dealing with the experts and the contractors. So that way it was manageable. So I think it's very, very important to have someone on site for the bigger emergencies. So people can go to them, they have someone there to answer their questions and not have the added burden or stress of having to pick up a phone, send an email, check emails. If you're distressed as a resident, the last thing you want to do is have more burden of having to go to emails and pick up a phone. If you can have someone on site, and I call it the information hub, that's something I'd strongly recommend. And it's more for the larger emergencies. Obviously, it's a big crisis, so you need more hands on deck. And consider if you need any emergency service workers, you know, first aid, any of that. I think that's important as well. So again, the tip here is understand the crisis before determining who you need. That's crucial. And getting the right assistance and parties involved at the right time is also crucial. So what next? So now, if you've got the experts, you've got the contractors in, it's all about determining the extent of damage and impact, you know, but determine what's needed now versus what can wait. And I think the immediate focus should be around safety. You know, what safety implications? That would be my focus. Address and fix any safety risks. So we've got everyone safe. And then all the cosmetic fixes, for me, are your last priority. It's the safety that is the first priority. But also consider, if it's possible, where you can have temporary repairs. And that's something that we did for this scheme in St. Leonard's, where they were saying we have to evacuate them because there was no power in the building because of the fire. Obviously, hit the main meter room. And my priority was, well, I need to get temporary power so I didn't have to evacuate all these residents on Christmas Eve. Even though we put them on notice, it may be necessary. Stay tuned. We're working on a temporary measure to avoid you having to vacate. Again, that's communicating what might happen so they don't get the surprise last minute. We weren't able to get the power on, so let's vacate. We were prepping them for the worst, but also working in the background to get that power on. And we were able to restore the power through a temporary measure, which avoided the need to evacuate those residents. So where that's possible, I encourage it. I know in some cases and crisis and emergencies, it might not be, but it's highly something that I would encourage where possible. But also determine a plan. And I think, you know, Shady was very instrumental in that with Opal Tower, where they determined a plan, what would be the next steps in resolving the overall damage and impact, but having priorities as well, like ensuring that we know what needs to happen first, what needs to happen after that, and again, putting some timelines around that.
And I think as well, what's hard for owners, Leanne, is to say, well, which engineer do I go to? Which fire consultant do I go to? This is where, again, the legal team comes in. If you've got a lawyer who specializes in owners corporations, they can advise, this is the best person. We have experience in this in terms of, you know, finding the best consultants. And there's been a lot of claims, and I say this to everybody, there's been a lot of claims in the last 3 years, unlike there ever has been before, given the attention that Strata has had. And so that has brought out who the best people are in the industry. So for you to be able to come up with a plan and say, okay, here is our plan. We're going to engage these experts. They're going to come and do reports. Those reports are going to be sent through a legal letter. We're going to see what we need to rectify and mitigate our losses now and what we can, you know, band-aid for now until we get a proper solution, you know, outlined with whoever needs to do it. That legal team will provide invaluable advice on who the best people are, and then those consultants can help you formulate a plan, because of course, as committee members, we aren't experts on those respective areas.
Absolutely. And I think it's essential having people that work with those experts to recommend, and that generally can be your managing agent, your building manager, or lawyers if you do have them involved, because with the lawyers, it's important to be briefing experts that can assist with litigation. So you've got experts that are great at what they do, but they don't have the experience in litigation. So that's important too, that if you're in an emergency situation that could potentially be litigated, then it's important to lean on your lawyers to recommend those experts. So not only are they going to assist with the crisis and the emergency, but they also can assist with any litigation for warranty or defect claims that may arise if it's a defect crisis. Sorry,
sometimes, Leanne, I come from it with like a really big, like we obviously had, you know, one of the biggest defects in Australia. So from my perspective, it might not just be a small little issue. Yes, you don't need a lawyer, and the Strata managing agent can probably help. But, you know, even if you just have to pay a lawyer like $500 to just advise on who a consultant is, maybe your Strata manager doesn't know. I'm telling you, that's $500 well spent. You go out, you engage someone that you think is best, you spend a few $1,000s on them, you end up finding that we need to find someone else. So even if it's not engaging a lawyer to, you know, be a part of the process, if that's what's required, just asking a legal representative who has expert Strata knowledge, who do you recommend to be a consultant, just paying them for that, I think would be valuable.
Absolutely. And then going back to what we discussed earlier, it's the brief. So the brief to the expert is important, because if you don't get the brief right, then you're not going to get the outcome that you require or need. So it's very important. And generally, when there is litigation, we lean on lawyers to brief the experts, so that the brief covers what they need from a legal perspective. But just touching on record keeping, so obviously the last thing you're thinking of during an emergency is keeping records. But it is important, and the reason why it's important is because you want to refer back to it as and when required, especially if there is warranty or litigation, you need to go back to it. But also as agents or building manager, it's an obligation. We've got to obviously document any steps or actions that we take on behalf of the principal. But even as committee members, you've also, you're appointed to you're appointed to make decisions on behalf of the principal, which is the owners corporation. So it's important as committee members, you're keeping record of your actions as well. And it's also keeping your records complete as an owners corporation. So I know it's the last thing you're thinking of, but it's important to keep records as well as you can. And, how do you do that? It's, like I said, document all the phone calls that you are making, keep record of any text messages, especially if it's a WeChat or WhatsApp chat group, keep all of that, and follow up things with an email. So if you are making the quick phone call or you are sending the texts on the WeChat or WhatsApp or other platforms like that, it's important, in my view, to follow up with an email confirmation for the key things. Obviously not everything, but any key decisions and directions that you're getting, follow up by email. And that's something that we did very well, with Shady and his committee. Shady would come, or another committee member would come and say, look, we've discussed this and this is what we've agreed, but that would be delivered to us as a managing agent on email. We will then keep record of that on file for the owners corporation so that the decisions they're making outside of a formal channel are still brought in and kept on file formally as part of their books and records. And I think that's important. So other factors to consider high level is obviously media. And I'm going to let Shady speak on that soon, because obviously Shady had a lot of experience with the media. And I think it's important to understand that media can assist, but it can also be detrimental as well in some avenues. So for me, it's about, initially I wouldn't talk to the media, in my own view, initially, because you want to understand the crisis yourself. I wouldn't dive into speaking to the media without you knowing the facts and circumstances, because the last thing you want to do is send the wrong message or incomplete message about the situation. So Shady, what was your view on the media before we talk about costs and other factors?
Yeah, friend and foe. They're a double-edged sword, our friends in the journalism world. Now, you have to understand that their job is to garner views, right? And the more they can garner views for their respective media outlets, the more that they've done their job. So sometimes you want eyes on your building, right? But sometimes you don't. And what most people think is that like that, I went to the media and I tried to, bring attention to that. Well, the media actually came to us first. It was Christmas Eve. It was a quiet news day. And then the media came up to us first. It was a risk in the dice that we rolled to continue engaging with them. And one of the reasons that we did that, and this is probably unique to our circumstance, is that the government was involved in the development of our building. And so, that the government and the media are very much aware of what they're doing. And so we use that avenue to ensure that there was pressure placed on the government to ensure that those that were related to our building were able to, as best as possible, cooperate and collaborate with us. I think it needs to be in proportion to the defect. I think the bigger your defect is, that everyone's going to know about it anyway, that is, those who are involved in, whether it's in your insurance or whatever it might be, then potentially you need some attention on that. The bigger the player behind your building as well, then potentially you want a little bit of media to come around that. But the smaller the player, the smaller the defect, in proportion, you might not want to engage with them, but it's a case-by-case situation.
And then cost. I don't think anyone can budget for an emergency crisis, but I am
absolutely not.
The next slide I am going to talk about a little bit of a toolkit. And I think it's wise, if you can and where possible in your budget, have some percentage allocated for an emergency. And it's not to fix the actual crisis itself, because you never know how big that disaster is going to be. You don't know if you're rectifying a fire damage, a flood damage, or a structural. But the costs for me are having some allowance in your budget for essential costs, and that is experts, engagement of, a project manager, potential legals. If your strata manager or building manager are going to be charging extra because it's outside of their scope, having some budget allowance for the essential steps and key costs that you need to expend, whether it was flood, fire, or defect-related emergency. I think that's really, really important, and it's something that I would strongly encourage you consider, whether you're a managing agent, to start recommending to your owners in their budget, or a building manager. And if you're committee members, I'd highly recommend that you start considering that in your budget, because it'd be a lot easier and less burden if you have some cost allowance in your budget. Again, the on-site presence, I think that's, very, very important, having someone physically on site. And then if you can extend that to a full setup of an information hub, I think that's really important as well. Having someone that's dealing with the communications and emotions, having someone that's dealing with the experts, having someone that, is issuing all the communications and doing all the record keeping. It's really, really helpful, because in an emergency crisis, the pressure is about the volume and everyone coming at you, wanting everything now or yesterday, when you can only do so much. So I think the more hands on deck, the better. And obviously the other factor to consider is the emotions. We've spoken about that, but that's going to be a big factor to consider. In any emergency, you'll have residents that are going to be very emotional about it. I know that, we came in Opal Tower after the major incident, but we still had some residents that were vacated, and I was still dealing with the emotions of some of their things that, they couldn't get access to, and some things that, expired, or, they had, family from overseas that bought a gift and, they couldn't get to it. Just sentimental things brings the emotions out in residents. That's something just to consider as well.
And so it's important that you look now at who's on my committee. If there was a crisis today, what's everyone's skill set, to be able to then know that, all right, you're going to do the on-site presence, you're very good, maybe you're a psychologist or a counselor, so you'll be good at dealing with anyone that's got some emotional, you're a journalist or someone who's worked in media, so maybe you can, be our, media representative. And then you're an accountant, / financial person, so you can start looking at how we're going to, cost this all out. So it's just about leaning on those in your team, those in your committee, to making sure that you're most effective as possible to handle the myriad of different issues that come up with a defect.
This final slide is how best prepared you can be. And I call it a toolkit, and it's something that, Shady's just mentioned now, having a map out on who's going to do what. So have a communication plan together, who would be issuing the communications, even having some templates prepared, I think is a good starting point. So if there's a fire emergency, these would be the communications. If it's a flood, this will be the communications. If it's a defect, warranty related, this could be the communication. Having a template is a starting point. Obviously, it won't be in a format that you could just issue it, because it needs to relate back to the specific emergency. But having a template as a starting point, I think is a good start. Have a media plan. As we've touched on, have a plan that if a media did turn up to the building, how would you handle that? An evacuation plan in the event that you had to evacuate. Like I said, a budget plan, allow for some cost in your budget. Consider the support staff. If you're a managing agent or a building manager, what support staff you lean on in the event of an emergency. So if it happens, you make the phone calls, that support team is on site. Have the right equipment. So again, in our situation in the Christmas Eve 23 fire, we obviously have a lot of remote laptops and things like that our staff were able to take with them to site. We've got VPN, which allows remote connection, allows our staff to dial in to access all the files. As they would be sitting in the office, they could access the same files. So it's important to have the right equipment to arm you to address any emergency. And also having access to key records and documents. So again, that's all that remote access. And in the event that you have to vacate anyone, and hopefully you don't, but it does happen, and in the Opal Tower it did happen, having a list of alternate accommodation providers in your area equivalent to your building, I think is important. So if you do have to make that quick decision, it's not like, okay, we need to evacuate, where do we go? If you have that accommodation plan, that's a quick and easier decision for you in the event of an emergency. Also having a list of contacts, it goes back to what Shady said before, knowing who to contact in an emergency, what experts, engineers, plumbers, builders, etc. I think that's really, really important. So have that ready on record. If there is an emergency, you can just refer to it, as opposed to making phone calls and trying to discover and work out, who those contractors should be. But also identifying high-risk residents with disabilities. And that's something I'm really encouraging a lot of committee members and owners corporations to be active about. Even if you send out, a circular once a year or every 6 months saying, look, we want to update our records. Can you please advise who has a disability, who is more vulnerable, so that if there is an emergency, we know of you. We can help you during an emergency. If you don't know of someone who has a disability or is more vulnerable, then it's going to be very hard for you to assist them if there is an emergency or an evacuation required. So I think that's something that you can arm yourself with that information to then use during a crisis or an emergency.
Thank you so much, Leanne and Shady, for that information. I thought the discussion around making sure you don't alienate any of the communities within your community was a really great point. And I thought that's really important. And we spoke about communication so much during the session. So yeah, that was a really big point. We have had questions that have come in, so we might cover them. Shady, this one I'll first cover is to you. All the communications and records, etc., are they kept on site at the building? Some strata plans just to use the particular strata management company, but is it easier just to keep them on site so that owners have access to the portal?
All official communications went through the strata manager. All documentation was stored on a separate drive, like an online cloud drive, that was able to be housed and looked at by the appropriate people. A lot of the things in our situation were quite confidential and were able to be privileged in nature. All the informal, so that was the formal, all the informal communications, we did not actually record them anywhere. So the WeChat and the WhatsApp, yes, you can download a history of that. So we did that download respectively, but the informal chats, again, were just housed where they were, but all formal communications were housed by the strata manager and managed by them.
I'd probably suggest that building plans, manuals and things like that are kept on site. Yes, absolutely have a soft copy as part of your records, whether the managing agent with the managing agent or your building manager, but also having a physical hard copy, I think, is important, so that if you have emergency workers that turn up to site for fire, things like that, and they need quick decisions, they don't have time to sort of make the call, who's got the soft copy, having a hard copy of those key documents is very helpful.
And Leanne, I'll just ask you as well, how many people is ideal for a strata committee? Your descriptions for a communications point, an expert's point, etc.
Look, the maximum under the Act is 9. I generally recommend an odd number because it sort of avoids a tie vote or a deadlock. And I generally think 5 is a good number because, and 5 to 7. I just feel that if you go any higher, it's hard to get a quorum or hard to get a majority decision because you're waiting on more decisions. And then the reverse is that if there's lots to do, then you want more hands on deck sharing the load. So ideally, I say 5 is the magic number for me.
Well, there's enough problems in a defect to deal with. And so it's very important that if you have a dysfunctional committee, figure that out. Get your house in order, sort out the family differences so that when the problem strikes, you're able to work effectively together.
Most important in communications is to have one spokesperson. Would you agree with that?
When you have that one key person that can be consistent, that is able to build rapport with all of the owners, you can get clear messaging. And I'll tell you, I stood up at town hall meetings and I was arguing up there from the stage with people, and everyone hears that argument. I'm not saying that you're going to have everybody agree with you, but when you're consistently having the same person talk, you can see the motive, you can see that there is a genuine desire here to make the best decision for the building. If you keep changing the spokesperson, you're going to lose your members, you're going to lose your owners, because why are they changing? What happened to Shady, and then what happened to Leanne, and then what happened to Tony and John? If you've got one clear communicator, you can build that trust, you can move the train as efficiently as possible, and again, reduce the politics, reduce the dysfunctionality that just occurs with any group of human beings that come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And in any crisis, you're going to have people that are going to criticize. That's natural because they're not in it to understand the detail, to understand why you made that decision. And sometimes you ideally want to make a different decision, but because of the circumstances, your best option was A as opposed to B. And people will say, well, why did you decide on A? B is better, but they don't understand the challenges. So that's why I go back to communications, explain what you can so people understand the rationale behind your decision. But as Shady said, I think, and I can commend Shady on his leadership role. He was excellent during the Opal Tower He was very, very, very good in leading the owners. But anytime we were getting, camps going off and trying to sort of manipulate the facts, Shady would then bring it to a forum openly and deliver the facts to the owners. And even his fellow committee members were very, very good in supporting, because they all had their roles. And that goes back to, my plan. Everyone had their role. Like, we had one member who was very, very good in corresponding with the foreign investors because of the language barrier. She was very, very instrumental in getting a lot of the decisions over the line because she was able to communicate the facts to them. And if we weren't able to do that as well as she did, then you would never have that support to go as far as we did. And then Shady was there as the chairman that was sort of letting people seeing it from a practical perspective rather than the legal perspective or the implications and the warranty. Shady just put it in, lay terms and said, this is our problem. We need to do this because if we don't, this is what it's going to end up like. So in the end, the outcome's been fantastic for Opal, and it's probably one of the only happy stories that we can probably refer to with a lot of, big emergency crisis. I mean, if you look at the Mascot Towers, that, for me, I feel for those owners, whereas Opal Towers had a happy ending. And I think that's been instrumental because of the right people involved, in particular the committee driving and obviously having the right experts around them.
So invest in your investment. The biggest thing that I had to try to convince owners of is I need to raise $2 million, right? Without getting into the details, to do what we needed to do. So everyone put $10,000 from your pocket into the pot so that you make sure that $10,000 doesn't cost you a $300,000 loss in 1 or 2 years' time. And so it is hard to see the long-term vision, to see the goal that we're trying to achieve and what you need to do to reach that goal. And so that is why don't be afraid of the camps that go against you. But when you talk to them, let that happen in public. Let them come out in the town hall forum, let them speak in public. So that when you answer them in public, they're like, those camps are going to talk to all the owners, but in public, you see how you're answering them. You see the response given. And then no matter what they say on the group chats, the behind the scenes meetings they're having, no, we were there. We heard the answer. I actually don't agree with you. And then you're able to move forward. So don't be afraid of them, but just engage with them publicly so that everyone can hear your answer rather than not know and then be persuaded by that camp.
And everyone's getting the same message at that point as well.
Absolutely.
Exactly right, Nikki. Yeah.
Okay. We had a few comments that come in, and people said, thank you so much, Leanne, for sharing I think it was one of the last slides that had the list of the requirements, and they found that really useful. And we also had other chat about whether there's a guide or a handbook that's available or some sort of a flow chart or basic template for setting up the keeping of good records. And I thought Megan Chatterton, I think from OCN's done some research in this area, and I'll have a look into it to see whether she's produced something. But I know, Leanne, you work with OCN as well. Do you have any news on that at all? Or
definitely, Megan's been fantastic in pushing this and OCN. And I know that they have put together a toolkit, and I believe she's got a submission that's gone to government as well, because they're very passionate about this. And I don't think we're seeing more and more disasters. Let's face it, we never used to see it. And we're not building simple, walk-ups with, 2 levels, 3 levels. The buildings are getting bigger, which means the disasters can get bigger, because you're dealing with a lot more residents. So I think it's important to turn our mind to it. And I believe OCN have done a really comprehensive toolkit as well. I have assisted with some things, but Megan is definitely one to contact in relation to that. And I'm even happy to reach out with you, Nikki, to get something that you can then share with your members.
Do you have anything that you'd like to leave us with, Leanne and Shady, at this point?
Look, I think my major tip is take control. Don't be afraid. I'm a big believer that we have a problem. It's a big problem. Let's carve it into smaller problems. Okay, we've got financial challenges, we've got communication issues, we've got, funding issues, budgeting, etc. Let's work out what we need to do and break it up into smaller problems, because it's easier to navigate the smaller issues. But remember, there's always a light at every tunnel. You just got to band together, stay strong and work together. Don't focus on in-house fighting, because sometimes the emotions get the better of you, because then you're taking your focus and the energy off what you need. Focus on what is important, and that is getting the crisis under control and rectified.
Be proactive. Don't be reactive. Don't wait for the problem to happen. Oh, when it comes and the issue arises, then we'll think about it. Imagine, mock it right now. You have a disaster in your building. What are you going to do? Tell your owners how you're going to react. Let them all understand that you're prepared, that you're ready, that you're being proactive. Be proactive, not reactive.
If you gained value from this video, please hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're looking for information about parking, strata insurance, defects and more, head over to lookupstrata.com.au or sign up to our free weekly newsletter via the link in the description box below.